if you aren't aware of Rob Zombie, if you don't know the Munsters, or if you don't like really campy gothic horror, most people, I think, could watch 5 minutes of this and turn it off because it looks too tacky.
I could whip you up a humpy down in the lamb.
Oh, no. Remember what happened last time?
He was batty.
I'm gonna go.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the FilmBudsPodcast. This is episode number 577, and my name is Henry. This time around, as a change of pace from the interviews, I have a remastered, slightly re-edited premium episode of the show, which, in case you don't know, I released those on Bandcamp at FilmBuds.bandcamp.com. But this one covers the films of director Rob Zombie, so going all the way from House of a Thousand Corpses to his most recent film to date, The Munsters. He's a very interesting filmmaker in a lot of ways. I talked about the good, the bad, but otherwise, as always, rate, review, subscribe, like, follow, watch us on YouTube if you haven't already. Tell your friends about the show, all that good stuff, and thanks to all those who have, and thanks for being here. But let's go ahead and get into my discussion on the films of Rob Zombie. Let's get to House of a Thousand Corpses, which is Rob Zombie's first movie. It came out in 2003, written and directed by Zombie. Stars Sid Haig, Karen Black, Bill Moseley, Sherry Moon Zombie, Rainn Wilson, Walton Goggins, Chris Hardwick. And the synopsis is two young couples traveling across the backwoods of Texas, searching for urban legends of murder, end up as prisoners of a bizarre and sadistic backwater family of serial killers. So, recently I've been watching Eli Roth's History of Horror series, which I highly recommend you check out if you are just a fan of movies in general, but especially the making of and of horror. Rob Zombie is someone who I've been familiar with. I've seen a few of his films over the years. I don't think he's ever going to be a favorite filmmaker of mine, but he is someone who, almost like Michael Bay, where he has a very discernible style. I don't think he has any masterpieces under his belt yet, but simply by being different makes him interesting. So I figured he would be a cool one to talk about. Some of these were first-time watches, so that was another excuse to do this show, just to give me a reason to go through all of them for the first time. And this one, House of a Thousand Corpses, some Rob Zombie isms that we'll get to later specifically, but for one, he very much wants to live, or his movies to live, in the same world as a lot of Tobe Hooper films, John Carpenter films, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but especially at this point, I am getting tired of the filmmakers who just have to reference things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's someone getting stuck at a random abandoned house or a house in the middle of the country, and then they just happen to be serial killers and they terrorize these people. But considering this one came out in the early 2000s, it was a bit of a reboot, I guess, or a refresher into that, as opposed to 20 years later. But I think the thing that I was surprised by with this one is, considering it is a debut movie, he really goes all out into making this movie memorable and really making it seem like he has way more of an understanding of filmmaking or experience as a filmmaker than he did at the time, because he did come from the heavy metal world, the rock world, and he did have experience with that, but not as a feature filmmaker, though. Watching this, I don't think I would necessarily think, oh, this was his first movie. I would think, oh, this is probably midway through his career, something like that, because there is every single style of camera work, of different color palettes. There's infrared, black and white, found footage, non-linear storytelling, psychedelic visuals. The costume and production design are off the charts, circus-esque, crazy. There's slow-mo. It's pretty impressive. Like, I was really taken aback, like, whether or not this is all very superficial, him trying too hard, he obviously made a very big impact with this movie that not a lot of other filmmakers, I guess, maybe have the courage to do first time around. And it makes sense that if this is your first movie and you're saying, hey, take me seriously, this is a good way to do it. It's almost like how when Steven Spielberg first showed his short films to different studio execs, he knew, based on his personal knowledge of film, the fancy camera works and edits that would trick these people into thinking, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. He's like way better than just an amateur. And I think that's what Rob Zombie did in this, especially because you see, as his movies go on, they get a little less crazy, especially when it comes to camera work and style. Even though they're still very heightened, they're not nearly as insane as this one, in my opinion. Talking about some more specifics, though, with this one, the opening is great with Captain Spaulding, and that whole character is amazing and so entertaining. The performance is great, the makeup, everything works about it. And actually, that's another thing. Most Rob Zombie characters just look gross. Like, I think he's one of the only filmmakers out there where I think he intentionally wants to make everything in his movies look pretty grotesque. Everyone's sweaty. Everyone looks like they haven't showered in days. They live in really crappy either trailers or rundown homes. Most characters have really gross teeth as well. Like, every time they smile, it's meant to be very unsettling and stomach churning. At least that's how it is for me. He does also mainly have blonde women in his movies. Not that that's inherently a bad thing, but I think he sort of has a obvious personal type, personal taste in his films when it comes to casting. And he did marry Sherry Moon Zombie later on. The music, him coming from a music background, the score is very heavy and rock and just edgy, headbanging, very bombastic sort of music. And I'll get to circle back around to specifics, sorry, but one thing that I don't like, he doesn't seem to or care about one or the other, doesn't seem to notice or care that basically everyone in his movies are screaming all the time. They're either yelling, crying, screaming curse words, or just screaming in terror. And I can only watch so many of his movies close together because they become very tiresome. In that way, he thinks that simply by having characters be at 11 out of 10 all the time, that makes it dramatic. That makes it intense. And really, that's not the case. So he doesn't really have a subtlety when it comes to that direction of actors and performance. Since most of his films, I would say, they almost are always meant to feel like a twisted nightmare. Very surreal, lots of Dutch angles, and never really giving you a sense of grounding. I think that is what makes most of his movies feel lesser than, or it makes me not want to revisit them as often because almost no one in his movies feel real. It feels like we never really get a chance to actually sit down with someone who feels like an actual person, which is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but that sets him apart from other people in horror that have a way of, at least for me, connecting with characters more and feeling like, all right, there's horror in this, but I can believe that this is a real place, a real location. And he occasionally gets that. I'm not saying that's always the case, but circling back around, the look of the house of the family is very good. It's just completely covered in just random crap, horror imagery, circus stuff, garage sale purchases, for lack of a better term. It's just completely filled with, I don't know if eye candy is the right word, but jam-packed with stuff, pack rat sort of vibe. Going into this for the first time, I didn't know Rainn Wilson was in it. He did this right before he got cast in The Office, so it's kind of cool to see him in something else. Walton Goggins, Sherry Moon Zombie, I don't think she's an amazing actor, but there's something about her that is entertaining and kind of over the top, but it just works in the context of Rob Zombie movies. The murder history ride with Captain Spaulding is awesome, where he takes you through the different serial killers of the late 20th century. Just in case you haven't seen it, the fish boy visual with one of the characters, the scene with Sherry Moon Zombie and one of the victims where she's scalping him pretty much is effective, and the final tunnel nightmare sequence with the guy and I don't know if it's a gas mask or whatever it is, but with the axe. There is a point still, it's only about 90 minutes. There was still points towards the end where all of the mixtures and constant in-your-face style of everything did become a little repetitive. I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, you're going all out. So I feel like the first two acts were by far the strongest and the most creative and the most interesting overall. One strong mark, though, that always makes me more forgiving is he does make the serial killer family fairly memorable. And in horror, that's not always the case. The killers, the monsters aren't always that impactful. And in this, I do think they are. And that's why he would go on to make a whole trilogy. Besides that, not a whole lot of other big points. It is worth watching if you want a crazy psychedelic experience. This is not a bad one to start with, especially if you are new to Rob Zombie. It would be, having now watched all of his movies, would be middle of the pack, I guess, ranking wise. I don't think that there's a Rob Zombie movie that I truly hate now, but I still didn't love this one as much as I thought I would, or as much as maybe others do. Oh, and quickly, I don't know if this is a big issue that people have or it's a hot take. I think the title of the movie is a little misleading. It's called House of 1,000 Corpses, and I know it's about a house that's filled with bodies, but it's nowhere near the amount that the title suggests. So I think that they could have found a different, again, that's a title that intrigues. So that one is a heavy 3.5 out of 5. Let's get to The Devil's Rejects, which came out in 2005. It stars Sid Haig, Sherry Moon Zombie, Bill Moseley, William Forsythe. And the synopsis is: the murderous backwoods Firefly family take to the road to escape the vengeful Sheriff Wydell, who is not afraid of being as ruthless as his target. So this one was a first-time watch for me. I knew it was a sequel, a continuation with these characters, but that's about it in terms of narrative and plot for the movie. And I had heard mainly good things about the movie. A lot of people, I think, seem to say this is the best Rob Zombie movie to date. On first viewing, it is about on par with House of 1,000 Corpses. It would be middle towards the top of his films ranking-wise. I do think that it is mostly for the better, a very stark difference in style from House of 1,000 Corpses, in that now I can tone things down a little bit, focus on other elements of the story, and so I don't have to over-embellish the style as much. Getting right to the beginning of the movie, the shootout at the house I like a lot, and he does a good job frequently throughout this one of making you believe, all right, they're going to get caught now. They're going to get killed. Like a dozen cops show up with assault rifles and shotguns, and they surround the house, and they all start shooting, and you think, all right, we're good now. Like, these guys are finally going to be taken down. This is it. Even though it's fairly ridiculous with how they get out and how they're almost entirely unharmed, even though they had a dozen rifles shooting at them. I do like the homemade body armor, even though it's silly, it's at least creative. That's not what I was expecting to happen with their defensive plan. And then they get out, even though the mother gets captured. There is, cutting too quickly, sorry, the scene, the dream sequence with Captain Spaulding and the hooker, is so gross. And I mean, it's intentionally that. For one thing, it's super graphic, but the dialogue between the two of them, like the dirty talk and it constantly showing close-ups of Captain Spaulding's rotting teeth, is just like, it's really vomit-inducing. And I mean, I guess it's effective in that way. It's not meant to be erotic, I would think. The whole motel sequence is really wild. The family gets captured, or the couples get captured, and then there's the cutting off the face. There's the reveal in the bathroom of the bodies with the blood and Devil's Rejects written on the wall. And I do like that name. That's a pretty good name for a gang or a serial killer group. One thing that I was going to mention at some point in this review that I didn't really mention in Corpses is another style, cinematic choice of zombie that I don't totally love. It's one of those bittersweet things, is he also feels the need to always have the cameras jammed into characters' faces all the time. And so I guess that's meant to create claustrophobia. And with a movie like this, where he is really showcasing the gore and the brutality and the sadism and all that, I get that to an extent, but he really, in all ways, he doesn't really have an off switch in that sense. And so he doesn't say, all right, this is important, I want this to be in your face, I'm going to zoom in on a character or on this scene, and then not so much in another. Instead, it's like, all right, I'm always thinking, okay, is this something I should care about? Is this important dialogue? Is it important character moments? Whatever it might be, it's either all important, none of it is important, it's never clear. Which maybe that's what he wants to do. Maybe that's just his idea, what he likes, that's fine. But regardless of whatever the actual motivation of him, the creative choice by him, it's really, I'd say 50-50 in terms of it working and not working. Few other things that I like. The soundtrack is very solid. I think he has a good mixture of well-known hits, but also some deep cuts. He also, and I guess you can just look at it broadly, where like the Coen brothers, for example, they are usually seen or referred to as Americana filmmakers, where they look at different aspects of American culture and tell a story within that. But it's much more, obviously, much more grounded and restrained, and Coen brothers are vastly better filmmakers to me. In some ways, Rob Zombie is almost the horror backwoods Americana filmmaker, and he does that better than most, and he makes that very iconic. Also, another neither here nor there creative choice to Zombies films is that most, not all, but most Rob Zombie protagonists look like Rob Zombie. They all have long, dirty blonde, scraggly hair, like they're in a metal band. They have tattoos, a scraggly beard. They usually are wearing tank tops and, or sleeveless shirts, raggedy jeans. Even Michael Myers in his Halloween films look like Rob Zombie. He's just beefed up like crazy. So that's something that I can't not always think of, okay, is this just being egotistical? Is it lazy? I do find, though, that overall the movie is fairly straightforward. It is a meandering escape film of these three killers trying to get out of Dodge and also cause chaos along the way. There's also the moment or the sequence at the fun town where there's the brothel, and that's another thing in Rob Zombie movies. Usually there's hookers of some kind, the sexualizing of older women. And I'm not trying to rag or nitpick Rob Zombie's movies, but he opens himself up for more, not criticism necessarily, but just general observations. For some reason, and I know that she's his wife now, he, especially in this, feels the need to show Sherry Moon Zombie's butt all the time. Like, especially like the top of her butt crack. She always pulls her pants down just enough or makes some joke about her butt. And then he also zooms down onto it when it makes no sense in the context of the scene. And I know that he is just a very explicit filmmaker when it comes to nudity and all that. But even for me, I was like, all right, this is excessive. Like, we get it. She's your wife, but also that's kind of weird. That's just me, though. The final sequence capture of the rejects at the house is good, and where the sheriff is able to give them payback, at least for a little while. The house being set on fire. However, and that brings me to another point, I can totally get into slashers, serial killers, whatever, having a larger-than-life, seemingly unkillable nature in the context of a movie, but his lack of subtlety in the end of this film really bugged me, because even though there are a lot of idiotic things that people do, the fact that this guy, the sheriff, has been hunting these three, and he went to so much trouble to find them, to capture them, and to torture them in this house. He lets Sherry Moon Zombie go in order to have a cat and mouse chase, I guess, to have more sadistic revenge fun with her, which in some ways I get, but realistically, someone like that who had been hunting these people would kill that person on the spot. And even Danny Trejo and the other thug who had the chance to kill all three of them at the brothel, I was like, wait, why aren't you shooting them? And I know it's a movie, whatever. I'm just talking about it for the sake of conversation. It sort of fell off for me because I'm like, all right, we're going. It's sort of playing realistically in terms of how they're able to get out alive and getting out of jams and all that. But he sets the house on fire. Somehow in the span of 5, 6, 7 minutes, the two men don't die, even though they're surrounded by gasoline in a burning wooden house, and somehow they're untouched. The cat and mouse chase obviously sets you up for the predictability of someone's going to come and save her, or she's going to find a weapon because they're on a farm. Like, yeah, go run off into the night on a farm where there's tools, there's weapons, more than likely, so that even though the final moment they are all shot in the car, I did like how that was done with the intercutting of the, I guess, home video footage, and the soundtrack was good, and that final just bloodbath, Bonnie and Clyde sort of thing I liked. And so I'm glad that it had that epilogue as opposed to just seeing Sherry Moon Zombie and the three rejects get away. Overall, I did like it. I think at some point I would like to go back and revisit it, and I could see it going up over time. That is a heavy 3.5 out of 5. Let's get to Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007, which I did cover briefly on the Halloween Premium podcast, which you can check out as well if you haven't already. I just covered that as more of a kind of a bonus, but I figured since that was a more concise sort of review, I'd re-review them in a more expansive way and more in the context of Rob Zombie rather than just Halloween as a whole. It stars Scout Taylor Compton, Malcolm McDowell, Tyler Mane, Brad Dourif, Sherry Moon Zombie, William Forsythe, a few others, Danny Trejo. And the synopsis is, after being committed for 15 years, Michael Myers, now a grown man and still very dangerous, escapes from the mental institution and immediately returns to Haddonfield to find his baby sister, Laurie. This is one of the last Halloween films, along with Halloween 2, that I saw of that franchise. Have seen it, or seen both, I'd say 3 times each, all the way through. Right off the bat, this would be towards the very bottom of Rob Zombie's filmography for me and of the Halloween franchise, whereas we'll get to 2, I feel a lot different about that one. It has grown on me a little bit over the years, but biggest thing that always brings it down is the origin story. Having this really long, like almost I'd say about 45-minute origin story with Michael Myers as a kid is the worst choice. And I understand that he's wanting to remake it, reboot it in his own way, add something different. I get the ambition, the attempt at that, but what makes someone like Michael Myers, a slasher killer, interesting or scary is we don't always know who it is, and or we don't know anything about them. We aren't attempted to try and care or sympathize with them. They're just a crazy person who puts on a mask, on a costume, and causes chaos. In this, I'm sorry that Michael Myers had a bad upbringing, an abusive father, a crappy family. He got bullied. I'm sorry about that, but regardless, that doesn't give you the right to brutally murder them or anyone because of that. And the fact that it's so long, it's so grim, desensitizing after a while, it feels manipulative. Maybe this isn't what he wanted, but it feels like here is a somewhat of a motivation for how he started. Maybe not a motivation, but some sort of humanization of him. All in all, it's just not that interesting either. The whole thing feels confused overall, but I just don't like spending time with that kid or just with Michael Myers in general out of his larger-than-life slasher story. Also, the fact that they have him has to wear a homemade mask all the time after he's been put in the institution, even when he's at home before the killings. It just feels like overkill, way too on the nose. He always has to have a mask on to feel safe or to feel like himself. It doesn't really work for me. Some specifics: the scene where he gets into a fight at school and his mom comes to the principal's office. She yells at the principal for calling her out. It's not getting upset with Michael immediately. It's like, you're really calling me again because he got into another fight? Like, the mom is pissed at the school for this. I'm like, that makes no sense. And then when the principal pulls out the dead cat in the plastic bag that Michael put in his backpack, the mom goes, "So what? It's a dead cat." Like, it's so easy for a kid to come across a dead cat. What's the big deal? Yeah, it may not be that uncommon for a child to come across a dead animal on the street or in the woods, whatever, but it's not common for him to stuff it in a bag and then have photographs of dead bodies. And it just feels so unrealistic, and it could have been written in a more subtle way. However, good things about the movie for a little bit. The breakout of Michael Myers when he's an adult. If the movie had started there, I would be talking about this movie in a vastly different way, or in a vastly better way, because you don't need to know anything about him when that happens. You could have cut those 45 minutes out and lost nothing with what the rest of the story holds for the most part, aside from the baby sister thing. And I do like when he's old, he's wearing the orange homemade mask and he has the long hair. Like, it's just a different look. And I don't mind that he's huge and bulked up like he is in this, because even though in the original or main franchise he's somewhat larger than normal, in this he's like a football player, wrestler, almost sort of guy. I love the look of Michael Myers in this when he puts on the iconic costume and Michael Myers mask. I think that looks fantastic, and how it's shot, it's very creepy and just visually very powerful. His relationship with Danny Trejo is, it is what it is. It's not a big part of the movie, but it's at least somewhat funny and interesting. Sherry Moon Zombie, who plays Michael Myers' mom, of course, as is Rob Zombie fashion, the mom has to be a stripper. Couldn't make her anything else. So that's another classic trope. The Myers family killing by Michael is very brutal. And I know some people, I'm still sort of split on it. I know some people rag on it for, like, why are you killing people who didn't necessarily really abuse you like your stepfather did, for example. And it carries into Halloween 2, as we'll get to, but it makes sense considering Michael Myers is a ruthless killer. He doesn't really discriminate. Even though it's really disturbing, I think that's the point. And so even though I don't like watching it, obviously, it still makes somewhat sense for who he becomes. Then jumping towards the end, the best part of the movie to me is when it is just the Laurie Michael chase, and it's Michael causing death and destruction through Haddonfield. He's going into houses randomly and just killing people. That's when I'm like, all right, it's simple, clean, slasher, intense, brutal storytelling. There's nothing else going on. It's just this place to place, kill to kill horror film. Although the third act, if we're just talking specifically of maybe the last 15-20 minutes, the actress who plays Laurie, while I know that it's a slasher, therefore there's going to be a lot of screaming, that whole section is Laurie screaming at the top of her lungs incessantly. It's the most loud, screeching, headache-inducing yell. All she's saying is, "Someone please help me. Someone please, please, someone please help me," over and over and over and over. And I'm like, you need to stop. Because for a little while, sure, I'm with you. But this is definitely, of all of his movies, the most offensive example of overacting, over dramatization. Besides that, the score is good. Overall, it's shot well. I don't really have any issues there. I think Halloween 2 looks much, much better, though. But I don't believe that it'll ever really climb higher than the rating I'm going to give it now. So that one is a light 3 out of 5. Let's get to Halloween 2, which came out in 2009. Stars Scout Taylor Compton once again, Tyler Mane, Sherry Moon Zombie. Mostly the same cast, but people like Octavia Spencer pop up, Richard Rayleigh. And the synopsis is, Laurie Strode struggles to come to terms with her brother Michael's deadly return to Haddonfield, Illinois. So this was the first time watching the unrated director's cut. I had seen Halloween 2, the theatrical cut, maybe 2 times, and that's what I reviewed on the original Halloween 2 review. This one adds about 15 extra minutes, so it's close to 2 hours. Firstly, I know this movie is fairly divisive, but on this rewatch, with this cut of the film, I'm a big fan of it, much more than I thought it would be. I think it feels so within its own little world of the franchise. It is, like, the imagery, for one, is insane. The white horse and Sherry Moon Zombie, who is the ghost mother of Michael. The lighting in the film is really, I think, for the budget, with these really dark locations, but then a lot of bright light coming in from the back and from the distance. The shots in the rain, like the parking lot scene. Like I teased with the first Halloween, what I love about this one is that it just starts really from where Halloween left off, and you're with Michael, you're with Laurie, there's no setup, you don't need to know anything else. You could just watch this one and not even bother with the first Halloween, in my opinion, and you're just off to the races. And while it has references and certain story beats that call back to the original Halloween 2, like in the hospital, for example, it's, for the most part, a original story. One big aspect of the movie that I know is very divisive is the extended dream sequence of Laurie at the hospital being chased by Michael. That is, I would say, probably my favorite sequence in the whole film. And I could not care less that it's a dream, because I'm so engaged and it's so intense in the best way. And even on first viewing, I didn't mind that none of that was real. I think it just feeds into Laurie's fear and trauma of that event, not being able to escape it and almost live it out all over again, just in a different context. How the killing of Octavia Spencer's character is one of the best parts, easily. The destruction of the guardhouse by Michael, the suspense of the guard going out to his car and Laurie not knowing if he's been killed or not, and then her waking up screaming. Some other good moments when he's wandering through the countryside and he's caught by the farmers or whoever it is. They beat him up and you think he's down, and then he gets back up and kills all three of them, including the woman who was trying to stop it. The part of the story with Malcolm McDowell using the Haddonfield killings and his back story or history with Michael and trying to exploit that, the sensationalism of that for money and for celebrity. One part that's really uncomfortable and gross to listen to is when the two EMT guys are driving through the countryside and there's the guy talking about, well, essentially necrophilia with the victims. But then thankfully they hit the cow. Michael shows up and kills both of them. The dream or nightmare moments or visuals with Laurie being trapped in the sort of like a coffin, but like the glass case, and pounding on that, and those very horrific quick flash images popping on screen. Laurie's inability to move on and not being able to process what happened, and her screaming at the therapist because she just doesn't understand. She's begging for help or begging for medication, but the therapist just can't really get a handle on her, and Laurie really unraveling. To me, even though it's heightened in a Rob Zombie way, it feels fairly grounded in that way. So I really respect that about the movie. Overall, though, even though I prefer the unrated cut of the film, it is still too long. There are points where it feels bloated, and it could have been tightened in some ways, and so there's that bittersweet nature of it being an unrated, expanded version. If you give it a chance and you watch it more so in the context of it just being a movie, a slasher film, as opposed to being in the context of the Halloween franchise, it might sit with you better. I don't know. And I really wish we'd gotten Halloween 3. I'm pretty sure they were going to call it Halloween 3D. I would have been more than okay. Or if they would do another one now, I'd be cool with that too. We'll see. I don't think we're ever going to get that, but who knows. So that one is a heavy 4 out of 5. Let's get to the Lords of Salem, which came out in 2012, done by Zombie. Stars Sherry Moon Zombie, Meg Foster, Bruce Davison, Jeff Daniel Phillips, Judy Geeson, Patricia Quinn, and a few others. And the synopsis is: radio DJ Heidi is sent a box containing a record, a quote-unquote gift from the Lords. The sounds within the grooves trigger flashbacks of her town's violent past. Is Heidi going mad, or are the Lords back to take revenge on Salem, Massachusetts? Quite the synopsis there. So I had seen this one once before, many years ago, didn't remember a whole lot about it, but this is still my favorite. I don't think it's a 5 out of 5, but I think it is a very underrated film, especially in the scope of art house indie horror. I feel like if this film had been released under A24 or Neon, one of the more reputable indie production companies, I think this one would have a much better and bigger audience and reputation. And the fact that it's done by Zombie with his normal crew, his normal companies, from what I could gather, it seems to be considered lesser than by many, or not as on many lists as I feel like it could be or should be. One of the best things about this and why it works so well, and it shows Zombie's talent, is that it is by far, at least when it comes to his horror films, it is by far his most restrained stylistically. Like, there's almost no screaming in this whole movie, which is uncommon. Aside from the flashbacks or dreams with the witches, everything else is very quiet. There's a very underlying, brooding score. There's a consistent atmosphere and mood. a lot of fixed cameras in other ways, and so it's not constantly handheld and all over the place in your face. There's actually variety there. He seems to pick his spots with that. There's a distance between you and the characters in terms of where the camera is. Everyone in this, for the most part, feels like a regular person, which is why I think this is Sheri Moon Zombie's best performance of Rob Zombie's films. She is very low-key, and both she and Rob Zombie are, through a number of means, are, to me, able to show a very, in some ways, realistic, grounded look at someone who goes through some sort of transformation, especially if it's internally, if it's in your mind, maybe you're exposed to something, or if it's a trauma coming back into your life and it suddenly causing you to have a decline, both professionally, emotionally. You disconnect from people because you don't know how they're going to handle it. You don't know how to talk about it. You don't even know how to really talk about it with yourself. And then she gets into substance abuse or back into abuse in that way in order to suppress it. And then there's an eventual, spoilers here, there is an eventual release, I guess, of all that. It shows someone purging that evil and that, as least as best you can, that inner turmoil from your body, and then that giving you some sort of peace. So I was really surprised, even when I saw this for the first time, how well that worked, despite all of the other supernatural witch stuff. The look of the movie, or the color palette, rather, is very washed out to where it almost looks black and white, but there's just enough color to give it a very distinctive look. And then he really exaggerates certain color moments, like, for example, the red cross in the dark room looks amazing. Just the look of Sheri Moon Zombie I really like in this, with the blonde dreads, the tattoos, and then the iconic striped shirt that she wears, and more so in the second half of the movie. All the witchcraft stuff in terms of the flashbacks are very Rob Zombie-esque, where it's very brutal, like the hand-carved C-section, so to speak. The scene or the dreams where she's having another C-section by the undead doctors. That's another great visceral image. And with the DJ, as well as the look of Zombie's apartment with the very elaborate wallpaper, it definitely is calling back to movies like The Fog, the John Carpenter film, as well as The Shining is probably the most obvious one. The sound of the record with that really underground vibe to it. The performances across the board, I don't really have any issues with anyone. They're all very understated. And even the witches, the modern day witches, it's not too long. It's only about 90 minutes. And then the third act really goes crazy with all of the demon priest imagery. And one of the best images is towards the end with her standing on top of the body-made hill. Not to give too much away, but that is definitely one of the best, probably the best images that Rob Zombie has ever done. And that whole third act really is one of his best. But I feel like, as opposed to his other movies, going back into the overall vibe of the film, it just takes its time. You're able to linger with certain shots, with characters in a certain moment when they're going through hell, whatever it might be. You give breathing space to these moments to really let them sink in, as opposed to something like, let's say, House of a Thousand Corpses. I really couldn't recommend it enough, and will probably always remain my favorite zombie film. I don't know how much more filmmaking he has left in him, but as of now, this is the crowning jewel. Oh, and another quick visual, actually. The images of the witches, the naked old witches standing in Sheri Moon Zombie's apartment, which is that nightmare reality, don't know which one it is. But the two shots, the one where she walks by the bathroom and the witch is standing in the room there, and then the best one to me is when she comes into the apartment and is playing with her dog, and there's the witch on the kitchen counter. And it's not making a point of focusing on that, but when you see it, it's like, oh my God. It's a very effective, shocking moment in the movie. That one is a light 4.5 out of 5. Let's get to 31, which came out in 2016. Stars Malcolm McDowell, Richard Brake, Sherry Moonzombie, Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, Kevin Jackson, mainly people who are in all of Zombie's films. And the synopsis is 5 carnival workers are kidnapped and held hostage in an abandoned, hellish compound where they are forced to participate in a violent game, the goal of which is to survive 12 hours against a gang of sadistic clowns. So this was one of the first Rob Zombie films that I saw. I got it on Blu-ray, just blind bought it because I was curious about Zombie's films, wanted to see what he was all about, and this was only my second time watching it. I know this is considered to be him having done Lords of Salem before this. I guess this was his, not return to form in terms of quality, but just returning to his roots, I guess, stylistically, because this is pretty much in the same vein, or might as well be in the same trilogy as Devil's Rejects, House of a Thousand Corpses, because it's the same setting, the same era, the same group of actors, the same type of story, except the actors who played the killers in the other films are now, for the most part, the victims and or survivors. Which I don't mind a movie like this. I don't mind that it feels like the others. It's just Zombie being Zombie, doing the things that he seems to like the most, which is shock value and a lot of gore in a survival-esque sort of setting. And both times that I've seen it, it's about at the same level, would be on par with most of his other films. Getting into it though, the opening in black and white with that long monologue, I don't mind that. I think it looks good. I like how it's shot, but the monologue overall just goes on too long, and I like that it's in your face and it makes you uneasy. I just feel like it could have been condensed somewhat. It has a lot of signature Rob Zombie character designs and production design. For example, probably the most iconic is the Nazi henchman guy. That character design is insane. The look of Malcolm McDowell and his wife, who are dressed up as these almost like Marie Antoinette era style costumes with the powdered wigs and the face makeup. There's the killer couple, let's say, and in particular the female character or the girlfriend who has an almost Harley Quinn look, but it's different enough to where it doesn't just feel like a blatant ripoff. It's its own design. One of, I think, the best scene in the whole movie, because it is really Rob Zombie going full anger mode, is the scene the survivors, or the players, let's call them, are stuck in that room with the killer clowns who all have the chainsaws. And there's a point where they're essentially having a sword fight, but with chainsaws. And the chainsaws are flying all over the screen. The blood is flying everywhere. Like, it's really unbelievable to watch. And even though I'd seen it before, I was just thinking, this is so demented but amazing at the same time. There's also one of, or I'd say the grossest scene in the film is when the main group of characters find the dinner table and they start eating, and then they realize one of their lost friends is the table itself, and they've been eating right off of him, and it's really like, oh, it's so disgusting. The original ambush at night when the main group is captured and they suddenly find themselves stuck in this hellhole. Also was not crazy about the freeze framing, which he does, for some reason, he does consistently throughout, which you can see him do that throughout a lot of his movies, but I feel like in this one, it's the most prominently used, or the most consistently used. It didn't really add much, and it became, after a while, it just became distracting. And it could have lost all those freeze frames and would not have hurt the narrative or the style or just the overall quality in any way. So this is one that I can always go back to and throw on if I'm just in the mood for some quick, in-your-face Rob Zombie. I doubt it will be the one to win over non-Rob Zombie fans or new audiences, I would say. This is not the one to start with, in my opinion, unless you're already a big horror fan. So that one is a heavy 3.5 out of 5. Let's get to 3 from Hell, which is the third film in the Firefly trilogy. Came out in 2019. Stars essentially the same people: Sheri Moon Zombie, Sid Haig, Richard Brake, Kevin Jackson, same old group. And the synopsis is, after barely surviving prison, the demented Firefly clan go on the run, unleashing a whole new wave of murder, madness, and mayhem. So this one was a first-time watch for me. I remember when it came out, it got kind of mixed reviews, and I just forgot about it. And then after having watched the first 2 films, I was curious to see this one for sure. And to just put it out there, this is definitely my least favorite Rob Zombie movie. And easily my least favorite of the 3, which that seems to be the popular opinion. I just feel like the main issue with this one is that with House of 1,000 Corpses and Devil's Rejects, stylistically, those movies feel very, very different, even story-wise, to a certain degree. And in this one, it really just feels like a retread of the Devil's Rejects, but a lesser version. As 31 was in some ways, a greatest hits of Rob Zombie, it feels like by the time I got to this one, I was just thinking, man, like I'm really ready to get through all these movies. And it's not really a mark or a jab at Rob Zombie. I just feel like this one really was disappointing. And one of the worst things about it was I just found it to be fairly dull. Like there is not a lot going on story-wise. For one, the way in which they survived the shooting, which you see at the end of Devil's Rejects, makes no sense. There's not really an explanation of that. And also, it does kind of not ruin Devil's Rejects, but ruins how cool and insane that ending is, where they go out in a blaze of bullets and you're like, okay, cool. They had their escape, their freedom, they caused mayhem for a while, but they met their demise. That's a perfect end to that film, as I said. But it is completely nonsensical that they just are up and about again, which it's called 3 from Hell, so maybe he's inferring that somehow they were resurrected, but there's no real backstory, explanation, any of that to help me understand or get behind that. I do like the prison sequence, and then the escape is good. But once it gets out into the countryside, just them causing mayhem, madness, the motel sequence, there's a brothel sequence, like it's all just, why are we seeing this? That was my inner mindset during this viewing. I was like, why did you make this? What purpose are you serving? Because if you want to make a third movie in this trilogy, that's fine, even though it doesn't really work logically. If you do it right, I'm fine with that, but I really feel like he lost himself in this, or maybe he was catering to what he thought fans wanted, or I don't know exactly, but a few specifics, a few positives here. The Natural Born Killers inspiration, it seems, the Oliver Stone inspiration of using the news footage to tell this story, at least in the beginning, and it's documentary style-esque. I like that. You could call it a gimmick, but I think it worked in the context of the movie. Sheri Moon Zombie is solid. She really gets to go all out in this, go crazy nuts, especially in that second half. Other than that, though, it is way too long. I think it's the longest of the 3. It's almost 2 hours, and I'm just thinking, of all the 3 movies, you made this one the longest. Why? Oh, and there's also one little note. I don't know if this is a widely known thing, but the actor who played Captain Spaulding, he's not in it that much because he had very bad health problems around the time of making this, and so his role was cut way, way down, so they had to introduce a different character to fill that spot. So he's only in it for a little bit, which, hey, you can't do anything about that. But it's at least nice to see him for the time that he's there. I really don't have that much else to say about it. It is one that I might go back and revisit at some point if I am watching the whole trilogy together, but largely forgettable. And I'm glad that, as we'll get to it, the Munsters, he took a break in the biggest 180 way from this style of film, and he says that he is done with the Firefly trilogy. Thank goodness. Because I can promise you there's nothing else there, and I'm tired of... I don't mind that he's using the trope, the writing choice of playing the sympathy for the devil vibe, which is much more successful in the first two, whereas in this one, it's really just, here, love these villains, love these killers, and there's so little to nothing to actually try and get us to care that doesn't feel really, really manipulative or just feels downright coarse and ugly for attempting that. So that one is a heavy 2.5 out of 5. Let's get to the last Rob Zombie film to date, which is The Munsters, which is a Netflix original, came out in 2022, stars mainly the same group of actors. You got Jorge Garcia in there, Sylvester McCoy, Cassandra Peterson, a few others. And the synopsis is reboot of The Munsters that followed a family of monsters who moves from Transylvania to an American suburb. So this one was a first-time watch for me, and it was the last one that I watched of Rob Zombie's films just because I went in order for the show. I remember when it was announced and people were thinking, wait, this isn't a classic Rob Zombie horror film. I don't know if it's really a kid's film because it's still very Rob Zombie, so I don't think a lot of kids would actually enjoy it just because of how bizarre it is, but it really is a very, very campy comedy horror film, so a complete departure. I had heard mixed things about it, both critically and audience-wise. One thing, I'm really glad that this was released via Netflix because I know that if this was put out in theaters, it would have bombed horribly. And I think even when it was on Netflix, it didn't get a huge viewership right off the bat, but I'm glad that this has more of a chance to be seen by a bigger audience than if it was in theaters, then on demand. Nobody would, or very few people would rent it or buy it, and it would just be completely swept under the rug. But this is very close to being my favorite Rob Zombie film. And I could see it on rewatch. I could see it possibly surpassing Lords of Salem. I think I like it slightly more than the unrated director's cut of Halloween 2. So the Lords of Salem, The Munsters, and Halloween 2, ranking-wise for top 3. I cannot believe how much fun I had with this movie. And it has been so long since I've seen a film that is so confidently, passionately campy and silly and innocent, and it shows more so than almost any other Rob Zombie film. It shows his love of Halloween, the holiday, not just the movies, of haunted houses, of crazy costumes, of classic monsters, of The Munsters, the show. And really the only other film that I can think of recently in the same vein is Tim Burton's Dark Shadows. But this one is very much a smaller budget, which is the Rob Zombie way. The production and costume design is, and yes, it does look like at times that we're just watching almost like a theatrical stage play that just happens to be caught on video or like home video stuff, but knowing the background of what went into this film and the concept and the origin, that worked so well for me. Some standout sequences would be the scientist laboratory, like the Frankenstein-esque laboratory, the look of the village, where you see Sherry Moon Zombie wandering around and there's that mishmash of neon lights and signs and the look of the castle, the fog on the floor, and all the torches, and the dining room of the Munsters couple. Really one of the best, if not the best, is the look of the Devil's Island Hotel, I believe it is, on the beach. Then performance-wise, everybody seems to be having so much fun with it. Sherry Moon Zombie, I know I talk about her really every time, but she's one of the lead actors. This is right on par with Lords of Salem. Like, the design of the character, the hair, the makeup, the costume is spot on, but she shows that she has a versatility. She may not have a Oscar-winning performance under her belt as of yet, but she can go from the crazy psychopath horror to restraint, grounded characters like in Lords of Salem, and then she can play the silly, campy stuff in the Munsters. She is so charming and entertaining, charismatic, fully committed to that role that every time she was on screen, I was fully engaged, having so much fun with it. Some broader things, the score is great, the soundtrack as well. The I Got You Babe montage is definitely a highlight of all that. I was also worried about the runtime. It's almost 2 hours, and I was thinking, oh man, this is going to wear out so easily. And maybe that's a criticism from people who don't like the movie, but after about the first 10 minutes or so where you're getting the feel of it, honestly, I wish it could have gone on longer, because every single scene, there is some sort of visual treat, Halloween treat to enjoy. And if not that, then it was a ridiculous comedy horror moment or a homage. So that one is a heavy, heavy 4 out of 5. Probably will go up over time. Maybe a 5 out of 5 someday. I don't know, but we'll see. Either way, I love it. All right, well, that is about it for the show. Hope that was, again, a change of pace, something different, and I think I'll do that from time to time, and then we'll have Elle back on for more current episodes. Rate, review, subscribe, like, follow, all the things, and hope you enjoyed it even half as much as I did, and see you next time, y'all.